Welcome back to Cinema Screen. Today, we're unraveling the chilling 2017 horror and crime masterpiece, 1922. Brace yourselves, as this journey is steeped in suspense, dread, and shocking revelations. Spoilers lie ahead, so proceed carefully and immerse yourself in the terror. The story begins in 1930 with a man named Wilfred Leland James purchasing a room where he carefully examines the surroundings before beginning to write his confession. According to Wilfred, his wife, Arlette Christina Winters James, inherited a vast 100-acre piece of fertile land following her father's death. Wilfred's intention was to combine her 100 acres with his own 80 acres for farming, as he believed it would all eventually belong to their only son, Henry Freeman James. One evening, while the three of them were having dinner, Arlette proposed that they sell all the land and move to a city like Omaha or St. Louis. Both Henry and Wilfred opposed this idea. The next morning, Wilfred suggested to Arlette that she transfer her father's land to him, but Arlette refused. Instead, she proposed that they sell the entire property, split the money, and get a divorce, with 14-year-old Henry staying with her. While Wilfred disagreed with this suggestion, he asked for time to think it over. Consumed by thoughts of the proposal, Wilfred spent days and nights. Eventually, he approached Arlette again and pleaded with her not to sell the 100 acres of land. However, Arlette stood firm and rejected his request. Frustrated and brooding over the issue, Wilfred discovered that Henry was romantically involved with a local girl named Shannon. Realizing that this relationship could work to his advantage, Wilfred decided to manipulate it. Using Henry's affection for Shannon, Wilfred gradually influenced his son against Arlette's decisions. Over time, Henry began to drift away from his mother and align himself with his father's views. One night, during dinner, a heated argument erupted between Henry and Arlette over her decisions. The argument escalated to the point where Arlette struck Henry, further fueling his anger and resentment towards her. Later, Wilfred, influenced by Arlette, decided to discuss with Henry what needed to be done to stop the sale of the land. He then told Arlette that both he and Henry agreed to sell everything and move to Omaha. Overjoyed by this apparent change of heart, Arlette decided to celebrate with Wilfred and Henry. During the celebration, Arlette consumed a significant amount of wine, becoming heavily intoxicated. Taking advantage of this, Wilfred helped her to the bedroom and put her to bed. Once she was asleep, Wilfred approached Henry and sought his help to carry out a plan. Despite being visibly emotional, Henry reluctantly agreed. The two of them quietly entered Arlette's room and, in a horrific act, murdered her in an inhumane manner. Afterward, they carried her lifeless body to a dry well near the house. Along the way, Henry fainted, but Wilfred managed to dispose of Arlette's body into the well and covered it. They then worked together to clean the bloodstains throughout the house. Wilfred gathered Arlette's clothes and other belongings and disposed of them in the same well. Upon returning, Wilfred noticed rats swarming over Arlette's corpse in the well. Determined to cover their tracks, Wilfred fabricated a story that made it seem as though Arlette had left the house voluntarily. However, he grew increasingly paranoid about the possibility of the sheriff finding her body in the well during an investigation. To eliminate this risk, he and Henry staged an accident involving a cow falling into the well. They killed the cow, buried it inside the well, and filled it with dirt to seal it off. Once this was done, they rested briefly, but their peace was interrupted by the arrival of the sheriff. Wilfred allowed the sheriff to inspect the house, including Arlette's bedroom, but the sheriff found nothing suspicious. Relieved, Wilfred returned to his daily life. The following day, Wilfred and others harvested the bountiful corn crop on the farm. During the same day, Wilfred encountered Shannon, who expressed concern about Henry's unusual behavior. She asked Wilfred if Henry was unwell, as he often appeared lost in thought. Wilfred, deflecting suspicion, told Shannon that Henry might be troubled by the fact that Arlette had left him. That night, Wilfred was awakened by the sound of cattle crying out. When he went to investigate, he was horrified to find rats attacking and feeding on the animals. As he prepared to shoot one of the rats, it scurried into a nearby pipe. Upon inspecting the pipe, Wilfred noticed a foul smell emanating from it. Realizing that the pipe was connected to the well where Arlette's body was buried, he understood that the stench was coming from her decomposing corpse. Wilfred decided to seal off all the pipes to contain the smell. The next day, Henry told Wilfred that he wanted to marry Shannon. Wilfred objected, stating that they were both too young and that he didn't have the financial means to support a wedding. At that moment, Shannon's father, Harlan Cottery, arrived and informed Wilfred that Shannon was pregnant and that Henry was fully responsible. Harlan added that he planned to send Shannon to St. Eusebia Catholic Home in Omaha. He also mentioned that none of this would have happened if Wilfred had agreed with Arlette's decision to sell the land. Later, Wilfred discussed Shannon's situation with Henry. During their conversation, Henry declared that he would elope with Shannon and marry her secretly. Wilfred strongly opposed this plan, leading Henry to angrily remind his father of what they had done to Arlette. The next morning, after Henry left for school, Wilfred searched the house for money Arlette might have hidden. While he found some, it wasn't enough to cover Henry and Shannon's marriage expenses. Desperate, Wilfred tried to secure a $35 loan by mortgaging the land. However, the financial institution offered to purchase the entire property for $750 instead. Wilfred declined the offer, but said he needed to discuss the matter with Henry. As Wilfred left the institution, he noticed that the truck he had arrived in was missing. In its place, he found a note from Henry. Reading it, Wilfred realized that Henry had taken the truck and run away with Shannon. Now alone in the house, Wilfred spent the night reading a book when he was suddenly terrified to see one of Arlette's dresses hanging in the room. Overcome with fear, he took the dress to the basement and locked it away. The following day, the sheriff visited Wilfred and informed him that his missing truck had been found 3 days earlier in Lime Bisca. He also mentioned that the individual who had arrived in the truck had robbed a general store of $23, suspecting that Henry might be involved. Furious, Wilfred refused to believe this and angrily asked the sheriff to leave his property. Later, as Wilfred brooded over the situation, he noticed water leaking through the roof of the house. Determined to fix it, he decided to mortgage his land for $750. Returning home with the money, he began searching for a bag to store it. During this search, a rat viciously bit one of his hands. The wound quickly worsened, and though Wilfred attempted to treat it, the injury became severely infected. As winter set in, the infection in Wilfred's hand grew worse. Despite preparing to seek medical treatment, his truck wouldn't start, forcing him to remain at home. While resting inside, he heard the front door creak open and was startled to see what appeared to be the apparition of Arlette. Terrified, Wilfred retreated to the basement. There, he was haunted by a vision of Arlette, accompanied by a swarm of rats. Whispering in his ear, Arlette told Wilfred about the crimes Henry had committed and revealed how these actions had ultimately led to the deaths of both Henry and Shannon. Overwhelmed by guilt and despair, Wilfred begged Arlette to end his suffering by killing him, but she left without harming him. Soon after, the sheriff arrived and took Wilfred to the hospital. There, doctors amputated his infected hand to save his life. While recovering, the sheriff returned with grim news. Henry and Shannon's bodies had been discovered 2 days earlier. When Wilfred went to see Henry's body, he was horrified. A nearby man explained that rats had partially eaten the bodies before they were found. Later, funeral services were held for Henry and Shannon, and the two were laid to rest. Tormented by guilt and despair, Wilfred approached Harlan, offering to sell his entire farm for $500. Overwhelmed with grief from Shannon's death, Harlan refused and angrily told Wilfred, "Never come to me again," before driving him away. Returning home, Wilfred discovered a dying cow on the porch. He shot the animal to put it out of its misery. A few days later, he sold the farm to the bank and moved to Omaha, where he found work in a factory. However, even there, he was haunted by rats. Overcome with fear, Wilfred eventually quit the job. Seeking redemption, Wilfred began visiting all the places Henry had robbed, asking for forgiveness. During this time, he wrote down his confession, pouring out every detail of his sins and regrets. But as he completed his confession, he was surrounded by an eerie presence. Rats began swarming the room, accompanied by the apparitions of Henry, Shannon, and Arlette. The film ends with a haunting ambiguity, leaving the audience to wonder what ultimately happens to Wilfred. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Stay tuned for more exciting movie breakdowns and see you in the next one.